What's going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our Monday Night Football preview for tonight's game between the Vikings and the Bears. Gonna get you ready for some Monday Night Football action. But first off, I'll look at the DFS side and how I'm attacking my single game lineups. We'll go player by player, talk about how to implement guys if you plan on using them. We'll talk about stacking, correlation, how to attack that from the DFS angle. And then afterwards, some pick'em props and underdog and prize picks. And I'm also entering for tonight's game. So whether you're playing on the fantasy side, betting some props, even some sportsbook lines with player props, we're gonna have you covered here in this video so we can have ourselves a solid end to week one, which has been massive for us. I'll throw a few slips that we've hit already. I think we're up to like 8 or 9 slips through the first weekend of games, and also a few good cashes on the Showdown side too. So we're looking to build on top of that, keep that momentum going. It's been a solid good week so far. Only thing better to do is add that cherry on top. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in. But first off, look at the DFS side. I absolutely love Showdown slates that are this wide open. You've got a close spread. You've got both teams that can do it on the ground and through the air. So whichever direction you want to take this game and the kind of script that you're running, you can run with that freely. It's not like one of these games where it's a 7-8 point spread, one team that's really passing heavy or really rushing heavy, where you're kind of getting pigeonholed into one specific game script. You have as much freedom as humanly possible here. So for example, if you want to run a low scoring script, running script, where maybe the Vikings get ahead and hold on to it, you could run that direction. You could run with a close shootout script, something like what we saw last night between the Bills and the Ravens. All of that is going to be viable, but what I usually see from the field whenever you get this kind of situation is people don't commit to a script. They run 3-3s, they play it pretty straight up, they kind of cover all of their bases in their lineups, and that is not what we want to do for Showdown. When we're entering single game lineups, particularly in the large field GPPs, we're looking to have the absolute nuts. We have to play for a specific outcome, and if we're expecting one team to be playing from ahead, maybe controlling the time of possession, then we want to be more rushing heavy for that team and more passing heavy for our buybacks on the other side. There's a million other different scripts that we can run through here on the live stream, but I think the real edge, if you're playing in the big $5, the big 50-cent GPP, the big $25, the big, I think it's a milli maker even here for Monday Night Football, you want to be extremely correlated. And what you're going to get with that is not only lineups that have a chance to get to the absolute nuts, but also lineups that are going to have lower ownership. And I don't mean with individual players, because your product ownership or your cumulative ownership, however you run your analysis for how chalky you're going to be, it might actually show that you're going to be chalkier than you're going to be. But if you compare that 3-3 to maybe a 4-2 or a 5-1 in either direction, you're going to get much less people that are going to those 4-2 and those 5-1. So the way that I'm differentiating tonight in my large field GPP exposure is to force in at least a 4-2 in either direction. I'm going to be playing 0 3-3s. I'm going to have some 3-3s in my cash lineups if I run any, and of course maybe in a single entry or two if I go in that direction. But for the sake of me playing against 50 to 100,000 other entries, there's a clear way that I'm playing tonight. So we're more so going to talk about how I'm going to correlate players when we go player by player here, outside of just like whether I think they're good or bad plays, because realistically, a lot of the slate here is usable depending on the kind of game script that you're going for. So let's start with Justin Jefferson at the top at $10,800, which I would argue is an extremely soft price tag. In fact, in terms of points per dollar projection, I have him at 1.8x, which is pretty elite, especially for a top tier option. And his ceiling, which we don't have on here right here, is 30 to 35 points. He's got by far the highest ceiling on the slate, which when it comes to captain exposure is really what we're looking for. If you want to dive into my player pool process, and I can give you guys a few tips here, when you're trying to find who the heck to use at captain, you want the guys that have the highest ceilings on the slate. And a lot of times those are quarterbacks. That's why they tend to be the most popular captains that we have. But big time running backs like a Derrick Henry, even a James Cook last night was somebody that I was using at captain. I ended up being a pretty good slate with having some Derrick Henry captain lineups, but I'm looking for players that can crack that 20 to 25 point threshold. And a DJ Moore, I guess if you scored a few touchdowns, could get there. These quarterbacks, of course, could get there as well with some rushing usage, but Justin Jefferson has by far the highest ceiling rate. So in my single entries, in my cash lineup for that matter, Justin Jefferson is the captain that I'm looking to use, who is extremely expensive. He's going to cost you a little bit over 16 grand to use him in that kind of spot, but you're getting nearly 30 projected fantasy points, which is massive for that sort of format, especially in a cash game where I'm looking to lock up as many guaranteed points as humanly possible. So the one thing I'll note with Justin Jefferson is that if you're going to use him at that captain spot, you want JJ McCarthy along with him, because if he's going to get to the optimal captain, that's going to be at least a 20 fantasy point performance. Maybe 18, 19 is borderline for getting that job done. It means he's going to score a touchdown, probably has at least close to 100 receiving yards, 5 or 6 catches. McCarthy is going to be close to optimal just based on that alone, let alone if he throws for another 100 passing yards, maybe even mixes in another rush rushing touchdown or a passing touchdown. That's why I want him with almost all my lineups that have Jefferson at captain. So not 100% sure what the flex exposure is going to look like. I know for sure I'm going to be trying to get over the field at the captain spot. Depending on how much exposure I get to captain, though, is going to limit how much I can use at flex, because if I have 35 to 40% Jefferson tonight, which is, I would say, a pretty realistic thing, then I am only going to have 65% of my lineups, maybe 70 to work with, where I could use him at that flex position. And he's not a lock. He's not somebody I'm going to be using in every single lineup, because when I'm running some 4-2 Bears lineups, particularly ones that are more expensive with maybe a DJ Moore and a Caleb Williams together, it's going to be tough to afford a Justin Jefferson. So, that flex exposure is probably going to be capped out at most around 50%, particularly if I'm using him in about 35% of my lineups at captain. Next up, we got DJ Moore at $9,600. So a big step down in price. That's the first thing worth noting here, is that it's a $1,200 difference from the first to the second priced player, but DJ Moore is still a bit overpriced. I've got him projected for about 1.5x points per dollar value, but in large field GPPs, he is the lowest owned player that we have towards the top end of the board here. So, you could say that maybe in the large field contests, like the big $5 or $25, like there's a time and place for getting to a DJ Moore, but in cash lineups in your single entries, I don't see a lot of the upside there. You've got these quarterbacks that have a higher floor than a DJ Moore, and when you look at their ceiling rate, also a higher ceiling rate. So that 0.5x points per dollar difference from 1.5x up to 2x with these two quarterbacks is, I think, worthy of really locking in your cash lineups. But as we get closer to lock, this sentiment where JJ is by far the best player on the slate, then you've got these two quarterbacks, should squeeze down this ownership. So it wouldn't surprise me if by the time we get to a little bit later on this afternoon and I'm running my second to third set of ownership projections, if he ends up closer to like 35% combined ownership. And, at the captain position, I feel like that'd be the best spot to play a DJ Moore, because he's almost touchdown or bust. He's almost like big play touchdown or bust when it comes to being in the optimal lineup. And if he's going to do that at $9,600, he could very well be the guy that you have to have at that 1.5x position. So, I'm not 100% sure on what my stand is going to be on DJ Moore yet. Like, I know Justin Jefferson's going to be a big part of my lineups, but if the ownership gets squeezed, I might throw him in at captain and not play him at flex. Might go with the all-in or, all-out approach on the DJ Moore and try and capture some of that big game upside. Let's mix these two quarterbacks together. So we got $9,200 Caleb Williams, also a $9,000 JJ McCarthy, both of which have a lot of potential this year. You have a lot of people hyping them up. You've got Ben Johnson with Caleb Williams, which is going to be massive. But if you guys remember that Detroit Lions offense, they were the number one rushing offense in the NFL. They scored more rushing touchdowns than anyone else. So sure, I do think Caleb is going to improve with a better play caller, somebody that can develop his skills at that position. However, don't forget about the rest of that team. And the same thing with JJ McCarthy. Like, sure, he's getting hyped up. I'm sure that he's going to have a pretty solid season. In fact, I expect him to run the ball a bit as well. I have his over on rushing yards, which we're going to get to on the pick'em side here in just a little bit. But at the same time, you've got a really good team around JJ McCarthy. You've got two solid running backs and an Aaron Jones Sr. and a Jordan Mason. Don't forget about the supporting cast around them. So these two quarterbacks are priorities, particularly because they have the highest points per dollar projections of any of the players on the slate. But there are times and places where they aren't going to get there. So you can see the combined ownership on these are about 70% of pop, which is about as high as you're going to see for a player on a showdown slate. So when I'm running a 4-2, for example, a lot of people are going to want to play both of these quarterbacks. But when I'm running a 4-2 in a large field GPP, where maybe it's a Bears-led lineup where I got Williams maybe even at captain, or maybe a DJ Moore at captain and then Caleb Williams at flex, I'll throw in another bear or two to get us up to those four players. Our buyback, I want to avoid using both quarterbacks there. And while there is a time and place where it could be McCarthy plus one other wide receiver as the two buybacks that you want to have there, those are going to be extremely popular. And if you avoid those kind of 4-2s where you just take one of the quarterbacks and remove them from your lineup, that is going to be utilized much, much less than some of these other lineup constructions, which is kind of what I was hinting at before, where sometimes the product ownership or the cumulative ownership can be a little bit misleading when it comes to Showdown. We have to be thinking about game scripting, and then of course just actual combinations and who people like using in their Showdown lineups, because the raw projection in the actual combinations that end up popular are not always one-to-one the same. So that's something that's harder to kind of track after the fact, but something that I've been trying to refine in my process over the last year or so, is trying to find the high-owned players, but if you use them together, they aren't going to be as popular. And an example of that, by the way, in golf, we do this all the time for the PGA DFS side is when you have two really expensive players, like maybe a Scotty and a Rory, that you can fit into the same lineup together. They'll be 30% projected owned for any given slate, but using them together gives you a much lower actual ownership for the rest of the field because they're so expensive to use together. So a little bit of a different example here. People just love using the quarterbacks, but a similar dynamic to what we have there in the golf streets, which, by the way, we do have the Pro Core Championship this week. So if you're a big golf fan, make sure to tune into that content on the channel as well. Next up, though, we got DeAndre Swift at $8,800. I would say a very affordable price tag, but the projections on him, especially if you look at the sportsbook odds, aren't as favorable. But when I was talking about the Ben Johnson factor before, it has a lot to do with DeAndre Swift, because I think Swift is going to have a much bigger game what the sportsbooks are accounting for. He's the clear number one back there. He had two running backs in the Lions team that were both getting sustained for massive usage. He's the bell cow back. He'll probably see 65 to 70% of the usage at that position. They're still going to have some other guys mixing in there, especially when he gets a little bit winded and he needs to take a few plays off. But at the same time, I could see him scoring 20 to 25 fantasy points here. So I love him at captain. I think he's underutilized at that spot, and then even at that flex position. And the reason for it's the raw projection, and we'll have to see if that trends up as the day goes on. Maybe the sports books are going to get higher and higher on his chances, but for the time being, he looks like somebody that could be a bit of a value in this middle tier range, as $8,800 for the running back one in a decent total game is cheaper than a lot of the situations that we see. And, in Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, they're only, $1,800 cheaper, $1,400 cheaper from a Swift down to an Aaron Jones, and they're sharing touches. You've got Swift, who, again, at least 65-70% of the touches, I think is a massive value at that sort of number. You got a Rome Odunze here at $8,000. They're expecting him to take a big step forward this year, and his projection is also kind of just middling, but he has big play upside. He's a big play wide receiver. He's good at getting those contested catches. That's going to help him with red zone production. Also, some of those sideline catches that will get you those 20 to maybe 30-yard gains. Those are massive on a PPR website like Draftkings. So at $8,000, I'm going to be using some Roman Dunze tonight as well. Between him and DJ Moore, I might end up fading one of the two. One of the two, though, I'm going to try and get over the field on because they have all that upside. Maybe it's even the captain position that I'm really leaning into on one of these two wide receivers. I think the ownership's going to really be the deciding factor for me, because if Moore holds at about this 45% mark, I'll probably go with Odunze because he's cheaper. He also lets me spend up for Justin Jefferson just a little bit more if I'm not accounting and not giving all those shares to a DJ Moore. And Odunze, I think he has the same kind of ceiling as what you have there with a DJ Moore. So we'll see what the ownership looks like. If it ends up close between the two, then it's going to be closer to a coin flip. But as is, looking like I'm going to play a little bit more Rome Odunze tonight. And you got these two Vikings running backs, worth pointing them out together. There's only a $400 difference between the two. But Aaron Jones is projecting for significantly more exposure. His carries lines at about 13.5 on books. They've got a Jordan Mason at about 9.5 carries. Their rushing yards difference is at about 20 to 30 yards, depending on the sportsbook you're looking at too. And the big difference for DraftKings scoring is that Aaron Jones is at 2.5 receptions and he has juice towards the over, whereas Jordan Mason, I believe, is at 0.5 receptions and juice towards the over. So that's nearly a 2-point difference there. You got on top of it the rushing yard difference, and Aaron Jones is probably the fantasy running back that you want. However, I say probably because if Jordan Mason scores a touchdown or gets that goal line carry, which, he's the big bruising back. It would not surprise me if he had that red zone running back role over in Aaron Jones. If he ends up scoring a touchdown, it could flip that on its head. So the ownership, I think, is pretty efficient at this point. Like Aaron Jones should and is deservingly the higher owned of the two players. But Jordan Mason, particularly if kind of like a Moore, he gets squeezed a bit. Let's say that when we get closer to lock, it's looking like Mason's going to be closer to 20% combined ownership. Maybe, who knows, maybe even a little bit lower than that 20% combined ownership, that he could be a sneaky GPP option. So as of now, I'm leaning towards playing a little bit of Aaron Jones, maybe matching the field on him. Not somebody that I'm really thrilled about using in this kind of timeshare situation, but Jordan Mason, somebody I'm going to have my side eye on at least throughout the rest of the day. In terms of the middle tier, my favorite play by far is a TJ Hawkinson. He's only $6,600, which is disrespectful for the kind of player that he is. And he's only 31.5% owned at flex, which I would argue is not enough exposure. He's at a 4.5 reception line on books, which is really dwarfing all the other players around him. And even his receiving yard line is much, much higher than these other players around him. So don't sleep on a Colston Loveland. He's that high upside rookie tight end, drafted highly. So they think, really highly of his chances to put some production up there. But TJ Hawkinson is an elite tier tight end. Like, let's not kid ourselves here. TJ Hawkinson's a top 5 fantasy tight end of this year, pretty much no matter what if he doesn't get injured. Colston Loveland, on the other hand, we have no idea. I mean, he might also be a top 5 tight end. We saw that with Brock Bowers last year, right? He completely blew people's minds with the kind of production that he was posting. But more than likely, for being reasonable about it, he's closer to like a 10 to 15 sort of tight end. So this $800 difference is nowhere near enough of a difference with that salary, which could lead to lower ownership on Loveland, which makes him a little bit more intriguing in the larger contest. But I mean, even with that, TJ Hawkinson's the better play. His points per dollar projection is about 0.3 higher. His ceiling is also higher than a Loveland, as you know, he has the chance to even get 8 to 10 receptions if he's just getting peppered with targets like he has a few times in his career. Give me a bunch of TJ Hawkinson tonight. But yeah, I won't be sleeping on Loveland. He'll probably be in my player pool. Just I'm hoping the ownership goes down a little bit compared to where it is right now. Next up, we got the Vikings defense, which I'm okay with these defenses. And I would say in like single entries cash, not going to be playing these defenses tonight. So it'd be Vikings defense. Bears defense is only $3,400. So that's kind of nice, really cheap there, but still not enough for me to really bite. What I will say, though, is that if you're running GPP lineups where we're trying to get to those 4-2s, running a defense is a really easy way to do so. And, you know, if we're not going to be running a quarterback from both sides in those 4-2s, right? I mentioned that being a good way for that I'm going to be trying to get different tonight. Then using a defense is a good way to hedge against that, because maybe the reason why the quarterback's not getting there is he throws a pick 6. He's struggling. He has 2, maybe even 3 turnovers that are giving points to that D/special teams. That could be a way to correlate your lineups and further differentiate them. And you can see with the Vikings defense, I've got them at only 15% combined ownership. So that is an extremely low number. And then the Bears defense that I have at 13% combined ownership. So, you know, JJ McCarthy, by the way, is juiced towards the over to throw an interception tonight. I believe the same thing with Caleb Williams. So they're expecting there to be some turnovers. You take one for a touchdown, which seemingly happens like once a week. And I don't think it happened this week at this point. Then they could get to the optimal lineup that way. So it would be more so GPPs where I'd be playing one of these two defenses, but you can't really discount those. These kickers, I will continue to sing their praises until they get their respect. Only $5,000 kickers is way too cheap, and they're only about 20% projected owned as well. So my role with these kickers, at least what I'm setting early in the year, is until they get to $5,500 and above and like 25% plus ownership in terms of combined ownership, I'm going to be hammering them pretty much no matter what, and especially when they're projecting for 1.6x points per dollar value. So yeah, give me some Will Reichard, also some Cairo Santos. Both of those players, especially in like the 4-2 GPP lineups, make a whole lot of sense. And Adam Thielen will be playing some slot wide receiver for the Vikings tonight, but so will Jalen Naylor. And even if Naylor ends up playing on the outside, they might throw one of the, you know, an Addison, maybe even a Jefferson into the slot for a snap or two. He's not going to play every snap, though. They've already said that they're going to put him on some sort of a snap count. Now, they haven't said exactly what that snap count is going to look like, but I'm assuming, at least in my projections, that'll play about half the snaps, which makes him a decent value at $4,400. But I feel like some of the rest of the industry is probably going to be too high on a Thielen. So at least as of right now, I'm cautiously optimistic about it. If he's going to stay only about 17% combined owned, that's where I have him right now, then yeah, I'll use him in some lineups tonight. But if he starts getting closer to that 25%, which I have a sneaking suspicion that he might throughout the rest of the day, then it's going to become a little bit more of a decision, because if he's not playing every single snap, you could argue that the upside could be a little bit lower than what we're hoping for. We've got a Cole Kmet next. He is $4,000. He's technically the tight end 2 for the Bears, because Loveland should be their tight end 1. However, Ben Johnson loves running 2 tight end sets. You saw that a whole bunch out there with the Lions, and some of those backup tight ends had productive days. And the thing that I think separates this as well, especially for week number 1, is that Cole Kmet has all the chemistry and rapport with Caleb Williams. I mean, he had the whole year of experience. He ended up having a pretty decent productive year as well on top of that. So at $4,000, he's got no floor. I mean, a 1.1 points per dollar projection is horrendous. So this is a GPP only option. I am not even sure if I'm going to end up using him tonight, but I at least want to throw it out there. But he could score a touchdown and get to the optimal lineup. Like, that is, it's a low percentage outcome, but it is reasonable. That could happen for Cole Kmet. And I believe his anytime touchdown odds are better than like plus 900 or plus 1,000. So at 10% ownership, you could argue that his equity to getting to the optimal lineup is probably higher than that ownership number. So I don't know, something I'll probably have to go back on and see whether I want to play it. And I'm not sure on the anytime touchdown odds. They might be 20-1 for all I know. But if it is close to that 10-1, it is kind of intriguing at about that 10% ownership mark. You've also got a Jalen Naylor here at $3,600. He's technically their wide receiver 4, but I think he's going to play a decent amount tonight, just because you don't have Addison in the mix, right? That's a big difference for this offense. And then you have Thielen not playing the entire time either. So I'm going to be using him in a few lineups. He is a downfield wide receiver as well, so somebody to keep an eye on. And especially the more that Thielen sits, I think that's going to give even more usage to somebody like Naylor. You have the Bears defense we already mentioned. Roschon Johnson is the one questionable tag that we have for this game. Not a whole lot of injury news, so that's why we didn't focus on it before. But if Roschon Johnson ends up being out, and he has been limited and even out of practice at times this week, so it is possible that he's not going to play week 1. Kyle Monangai, and I probably completely butchered that name, but I did my best with it, is going to get some usage because he's shown a lot of flash in the preseason, relatively high yards per carry. He's a young player, somebody that they invested draft equity into. So at $2,800, if Johnson's out, I could see myself using him in some of my large field GPP lineups, but that is dependent on Johnson not playing. If Johnson plays, then he's the guy I'd probably be mixing in terms of my cheap Chicago Bears running back towards the bottom. My favorite cheap punt towards the bottom, though, is no doubt Alameda Zaccheaus. He's by far the best projecting play down here. He's at a 3.4x points per dollar value, and he's going to be the slot wide receiver for Chicago. So we know that he's going to be getting some usage tonight, and he only has like a 23 to 25 yard projection, but he's at 1.5 receptions. So that gets him to about a 4 fantasy point floor. And then, of course, you have the upside of him getting a big play, maybe even a touchdown on top of that, which is why he's projecting through the roof here. Now, the problem with it is that he's by far the highest owned player towards the bottom, right? He's double the ownership, triple, even quadruple, 5 times the ownership of a lot of the other players around him. So you're going to be paying for that in single entries and some of the smaller field GPPs. So you don't have to worry about that nearly as much. But if you're playing in, the large field GPPs where you're playing against 50 to 100,000 other people, you're going to have to leave some salary on the table. Maybe play one of those 4-2 or 5-1 game stacks to really get different to what the rest of the field is doing to offset that kind of chalk towards the bottom. So he is my favorite play, but it does come with the price. Oliver, he should be playing a bit tonight, so you could use him as a little bit of a flyer play as that backup tight end. Ty Felton, not even sure if he's going to see any snaps. Has a chance to, I guess, with Addison out of the mix. And then Durham Smythe, he is the 3rd tight end for the Bears. Also, because they run a lot of 2 tight end sets, he could see some usage tonight, but it's probably like 10 to maybe 20% of the snaps. Now, Oliver's probably looking at closer to like 30 to maybe even a 40% snap share. So if you were going to go with somebody other than Zaccheaus down low or one of those Chicago running backs, Oliver would probably be the tertiary guy I'd be using here towards the bottom. But I'm not going to be using a lot of these punts down there. Like, yeah, Zaccheaus will be in some lineups, maybe one of those 2 running backs, but it's going to be a lot of this $3,000 to $4,000 value that I'm using in my large field GPP lineup. So hopefully gives you guys a little bit of a taste of what to expect for tonight and how we're attacking our single game lineups. And now for the prop side of things, we'll go through some value I've already entered for tonight that you might want to consider adding to your own portfolio. And I already have 2 two-mans in already, one of which already bumped. I will give you guys those props just in case you still want to tail them, but we got one here to the right that is still fresh for us. So the first one I ended up going with was 2 quarterback props. So first off with JJ McCarthy was an over 15.5 rushing yards. It is now at 17.5. And half the reason I took it at that 15.5 number was because of the value that was there. It was at 17.5, 18.5 in other books. So it's not really something that I would recommend playing at this point, but at least did want to throw it out there as I still think that he's going to go for a bunch of rushing yards tonight. He's mobile. You've seen a lot of quarterbacks this year really leveraging that on the ground. And I think it has to do with the type of defense that these defenses have been running out early. So we'll have to see if it's the same story tonight, but that was one prop that I took. And then the other side of it, I also got this Caleb Williams and over 30.5 passing attempts, which is up at 31 too. So that is the value of being on my Patreon page, being a part of the community, is that you can get these props before there's any sort of line movement, but at least did want to throw it out there because it was only that one difference. Also, there was a multiplier on it before. It was 0.89x when I took it at 30.5. So now that it is even money at that 31.5 number, you could still argue that it's value, especially when you look at a site like Pinnacle that has Caleb Williams at this number. He's minus 135 towards the over. So there's still some inherent like plus EV value on that sort of a line. And with this JJ McCarthy one, it is still at the very least about where it is in other books. So it's not like you're taking a negative EV prop when it came to that one. So at least did want to throw that out there in case you wanted to add any to these other 2 props that we took. But I ended up entering these about just 2 minutes ago, posted them on my Patreon page in the middle of shooting this video as the other one moved. but these are also value for tonight. And what I really like about this slip compared to the other one I played is that there's some correlation involved here too. And it's not 100% correlation or anything, but if the Bears were to get a lead, that would be massive for this two-man. But let's talk about why I like the DeAndre Swift one first. So he's here at 52.5 rushing yards. He's at that same number on Pinnacle as well, and he's minus 137 towards the over. So that is quite a bit of plus EV value there, especially for a site like Pinnacle that's known as one of the sharper ones around the industry. And if you saw the DFS section, you guys know that I love Ben Johnson. I mean, I just think that he's an offensive savant, maybe the best offensive coach that you have in the NFL. And with the Detroit Lions, he had that running game going. I mean, they had a good O-line. That was part of that over there. But his play calling, the kind of way that he spreads out the offense and then attacks you up the middle with those running backs is massive for a guy like Swift. And that was a productive offense for two running backs. He had two guys sustaining top 20 running back production there. I mean, Gibbs was a top 10. He had a top 20 there with Montgomery on the other side. Swift is getting 65 to 70% of the touches for this team. So I'm expecting him to have a massive year if he can stay healthy. And at 52.5, I mean, this is the kind of line that we saw for him last year. I think it's slightly disrespectful. I mean, they're expected to play better tonight. It's why the spreads are closer than a lot of the games towards the very end of last season. So with nearly minus 140 juice, I'll mix that in gladly. And as I was saying, if we end up getting a sort of script that plays into this, it could be massive for DeAndre Swift too. And then on the other side of it, we have this Aaron Jones over on receptions. Not quite as much a plus EV value, but I just disagree with the take here on the sports books. I know Jordan Mason's in there. He's going to take away some snaps, but he's not a receiving back. Like, he's capable of having some kind of receiving upside, but Aaron Jones can legit run routes. He's much more shiftier. He's much quicker than a Jordan Mason. Mason's more of that bruising running back. And in the red zone, yeah, I think they're going to use Mason more, but the rest of the play, Aaron Jones is going to see a lot of usage. And if for some reason the Bears were to get a sizable lead, again, that's kind of like the cherry on top with this one is the potential for this correlation, that Aaron Jones is going to play a whole lot more, because if they're playing from a touchdown or maybe even two touchdowns behind, they're going to be passing, and Aaron Jones is the better passing blocker of those two running backs. And also, like I said, the one with the more sure hands. So I like that aspect of this, that correlation, but he is almost minus 130 juice towards the over, so he is slightly leaning towards the over on almost all these sports books. And I think as the day goes on, I don't think I'm going to be the only person that catches this with Jones. And, you know, the fact that I'm not even sure his rushing production, or his receiving production, I should say, is going to fall off, because the guy that's behind him that's taking away the usage isn't known for that aspect of it. So I like both of these, a little bit of a correlation, and still the 3x payout. So grab these if they're still available at those numbers, as just like that first slip that I entered, these are probably going to move, right? There's a reason why I'm betting these. There's a reason why there's value on them, and they're not going to sit around forever. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. Go ahead, subscribe if you guys haven't already, and also smash that like button to help get this out there to even more people. So if you found it helpful, you learned a little bit of something from it, make sure to share the goods with everyone else out there, and also subscribe to my Patreon page if you guys haven't already as well, for all the content that we have for Monday night. We've got projection updates that are going to drop throughout the day, giving you guys an idea of exactly where the field is. I'll also be able to adjust my player pool to account for all of that. If you guys want to see exactly who I'm using for tonight and how I'm deploying them, you can get the spreadsheet on the DFS side. That'll give you all those DFS projections that we went through before, along with my stack info for all my plays, so you guys can get an idea of exactly how I'm building my lineups. And then for the prop side of things, with the betting side, you guys can get all of that on the prop tier. That would be my Underdog and Prize Picks props, every single piece of exposure that I'm entering as I'm getting to them. If you join the prop tier, you'll have access to all of those. But that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck with everything that you guys are going with. We will have some golf content dropping here on the channel a little bit later on this afternoon, so I'm really looking forward to that. But Monday Night Football, a great way to get this week started, and looking forward for all the content to come.